I opened the gift my daughter handed me on Father's Day, a pair of socks that still had the $9 tag dangling from them. Across the table, her father-in-law raised his wrist, showing off a brand new $30,000 watch, bought with my money. The room went silent, but the echo of betrayal was deafening. That moment didn't just bruise a father's pride, it shattered something deeper. It was the kind of hurt that doesn't fade with time, the kind that forces a man to see the truth about the people he thought he'd raised, the life he thought he'd built, and the dignity he'd quietly given away. But every wound has its turning point, and sometimes losing everything you thought mattered is how you finally reclaim what truly does. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. The morning light in Seattle has a way of sneaking through the mist, soft, reluctant, like it isn't sure it belongs. From my porch, I could see the ferries cutting through Puget Sound, white wakes fanning behind them like pages torn from a book I'd already read too many times. The air carried that briny smell of salt and rust, and the cry of a gull cut through the stillness. Another ordinary Sunday, except that it was Father's Day, the one day a year that used to mean something before time turned it into routine. I'm 62 now, a retired naval mechanic who still wakes at dawn even though there's no ship waiting for me. My house, an old cedar-sided thing I built with Laura, creaks when the wind shifts. The smell of machine oil lingers in the garage where my hands once earned their purpose. Laura's photo sits by the window, her smile soft as sea foam. She's been gone almost 10 years, but I still pour her a cup of coffee every morning. Old habits are anchors. They keep you from drifting even when you should. I live quietly. A small radio plays old blues records. The kettle whistles. I polish the same table every day with the same lemon oil Laura used. People say widowers turn sentimental, but to me it's just maintenance, like keeping an engine clean so it won't seize. The world outside moves too fast now. I prefer things that stay where you left them. My daughter, Samantha, doesn't visit often. She lives over on Bainbridge Island with her husband, Ethan Hale, son of a big real estate man named Gregory Hale. The Hales are the kind who think wealth is proof of virtue. Samantha fits into their photos perfectly. Smooth hair, muted clothes, the right kind of smile. I remember when she used to wear paint-stained jeans and laugh until she hiccuped. Somewhere between her first internship and that wedding in the glass church, I lost her to a life that speaks a language I never learned. I did what I could for her, sold my boat for her college tuition, paid half the down payment on their condo, added her to my credit card, just in case. You tell yourself it's love, and maybe it is, but love shouldn't always be a transaction. Still, when you're a father, you keep giving, because that's what you were trained to do. That morning, I set the table for 3 out of habit. Coffee, blueberry waffles, the syrup Laura used to warm in the microwave until it steamed. I knew Samantha would probably cancel last minute, but a man needs something to look forward to. The clock above the stove ticked unevenly, one gear slipping just enough to make the seconds hesitate. When the car finally pulled into the gravel drive, my heart jumped like it used to when she was little and running home from school. She came in smelling of perfume and city air, a sleek coat draped over her shoulders. Ethan followed, half distracted by whatever blinked on his phone. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," she said, handing me a paper bag with shiny handles. It was so light I almost thought it was empty. Inside lay a pair of striped socks, still tagged, $9. She smiled like it was something special. "You're practical. Thought you'd like these." I smiled back, pretending I didn't feel the hollowness behind her words. "Practical's good," I said. Ethan gave a polite chuckle, the kind that ends a conversation rather than starts one. I asked if they'd stay for waffles. Samantha glanced at her watch. "We can't, Dad. Lunch with Greg's family in Capitol Hill." She kissed my cheek quickly, The way you pat a dog before leaving for work, and they were gone before the coffee cooled. The house felt louder after they left. The refrigerator humming, the clock stuttering, the rain starting up again against the window. I sat at the table staring at the extra plates, the one poured cup of coffee still steaming faintly across from me. For a moment I thought I heard Laura's voice, the way she used to tease. You expect the world to clap every time you show up with your heart open. I almost laughed. I folded the socks carefully, smoothing the creases like they were worth something, and placed them on the counter. Outside, the ferries moved through the fog, their horns echoing off the water. I wondered if Samantha still remembered the days we'd feed seagulls at the dock, her laughter bouncing between the waves. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. Either way, she wasn't that girl anymore. As the mist thickened and the day dulled into gray, I realized silence has many shapes. There's the silence of grief, the silence of distance, and then there's the silence that comes when a father and a daughter stop speaking the same language. That morning, I met the last kind, and it settled in the house like dust, fine, invisible, and nearly impossible to clean. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply, only to realize they saw you as a convenience, stay right here, because what happens next will make you question what love and loyalty really mean. The rain started just after lunch, the kind that didn't rush but lingered, thin, steady lines tracing down the kitchen window. I sat at the table where the paper bag still rested, the one holding those striped socks. They looked almost comical lying there, so small and cheap against the old oak grain. I told myself not to make a big deal out of it. It was just a gift, nothing more. Kids today had different ways of showing love, didn't they? But the lie didn't hold. I could feel something tugging at the edges of my calm, that dull ache that comes when disappointment hardens into realization. The house felt quieter than usual. The clock above the doorway had stopped again, its hands frozen just past 11. I should have fixed it months ago, but some part of me liked the stillness. It kept time from moving forward. Outside, the sound was wrapped in mist, the horizon erased. I thought of Laura then, how she used to say, "The sea never lies. It only reflects what you bring to it." Maybe that's why it looks so empty now, because I was... Out of habit, I opened my laptop, planning to check the news and maybe distract myself with headlines about things that didn't concern me. But the first thing that popped up wasn't news, it was Samantha's name. Her profile photo appeared beside a new post, and I almost smiled before I read the caption. "A gift worthy of a man of class. Happy Father's Day, Mr. Hale." My eyes lingered on the image. Gregory Hale, her father-in-law, seated at a lavish dinner table surrounded by crystal glasses and polished silverware. On his wrist gleamed a watch, silver, bold, and unmistakably expensive. The camera caught the glint of its face like it wanted me to see it. I zoomed in. The logo on the dial was one I knew, Vacheron Constantin. I'd walked past that model in the window of Time and Tide Ballard just a few weeks earlier, stared at it for a long minute before walking away. $30,000. That number clicked into place in my head before I even wanted to admit why it felt familiar. 2 months ago, Samantha had called me late at night, crying. She said Ethan had a medical emergency, that insurance wouldn't cover a special treatment. I wired $30,000 the next morning, without hesitation. I hadn't even asked for details. I just trusted her, because that's what fathers do. Now, watching Gregory Hale lift his champagne glass, that same number burned behind my eyes. 30,000. The caption echoed, "A gift worthy of a man of class." I felt the room tilt slightly, as if gravity had chosen sides. My chest tightened. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Ethan had paid for it. But deep down, I knew. The money, the timing, the smirk in Gregory's smile, it all lined up too neatly. I stared at the photo until the screen dimmed. My reflection stared back, older than I remembered, the gray in my beard heavier under the low light. I thought of Samantha as a child, knees scraped, hair tangled, promising she'd always take care of Daddy. That memory and this image didn't belong in the same universe. I rubbed my hands together, trying to steady the tremor. "You always let love blind you," Laura's voice whispered in my mind. That gentle reproach she used when I fixed the wrong thing on the boat. and insisted it was fine. She'd been right then. She was right now. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out my old folder of bank statements. The paper felt rough between my fingers. There it was. The transfer for $30,000 to Samantha Mercer Hale, 8 weeks ago. No note, no explanation, just trust. I felt something inside me shift, not a burst of anger, but something colder, quieter, a kind of still rage that doesn't shout, just decides. I reached for my phone and dialed her number. It rang 4 times before the voicemail kicked in. "Hey, it's Dad," I said, voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "We need to talk." I hung up before I could say anything softer. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming on the roof like a slow countdown. I stepped out onto the porch, the chill biting through my sweater. Across the sound, faint city lights blinked through the fog. Other people's lives, other people's dinners, all of them unaware of the storm that had started in one quiet house on the hill. I stayed there until the last ferry horn echoed across the water. Then I went back inside, shut the laptop, and looked up at the stopped clock. Its hands hadn't moved an inch, but for the first time in a long while, I could hear something ticking. Not from the clock, but from somewhere inside me. A quiet, relentless rhythm that wasn't forgiveness this time. It was suspicion, patient and precise, marking the start of something I didn't yet understand, but knew I couldn't ignore. Have you ever smiled through humiliation just to keep the peace? Keep watching, because the moment pride meets betrayal, everything begins to unravel. The morning broke gray and damp, the kind of Seattle morning where even the seagulls seemed too tired to cry. The rain hadn't stopped through the night, only softened to a mist that clung to the windows like breath. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the half-empty mug of coffee on the counter. The smell was bitter and comforting, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. The photo of the watch still lived behind my eyes, sharp as glass. I'd dreamt of it, that silver face gleaming against Gregory Hale's wrist, like a quiet insult only I was meant to see. I told myself I needed proof, something real, something that couldn't be explained away. So, I printed the picture from Samantha's post and slipped it into an envelope with my bank statement. The $30,000 transfer glared from the page, a number that now felt less like generosity and more like evidence. I folded the papers carefully, the way you do with something that used to mean love and now meant betrayal. The drive to Ballard was quiet. The roads shimmered with rain, reflecting the red brake lights ahead like veins pulsing through the wet pavement. I passed the docks where I'd once kept my small sailboat, the Laura Bell. I'd sold it years ago to pay for Samantha's college tuition. She'd cried when she found out, promised she'd buy me a new one someday. I almost smiled at that memory before it turned bitter. I'd believed her then, just like I'd believed her about the medical bills. The shop was easy to spot. Time and tide, etched in gold above a polished oak door, looked exactly the way wealth always does, quiet, self-assured, and certain you don't belong there. I hesitated outside, rain dripping from the brim of my cap, before pushing through the door. Inside smelled of leather and clock oil. Every surface gleamed. The walls ticked softly with synchronized precision, hundreds of tiny gears marking time in unison. A young woman in a tailored black dress approached me with a smile too professional to be real. "Good morning, sir. Can I help you find something special today?" I reached into my coat and handed her the photo. "I just need some information," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "This watch, was it sold here?" She glanced at the image and I caught the flicker of recognition before she smoothed her expression. "Let me check with our manager," she said politely, disappearing through a door behind the counter. I could hear the faint hum of conversation, then the soft click of footsteps returning. A man in his 50s emerged, bald on top, his tie perfectly straight. "Good morning," he said, offering his hand. "I'm Benson." "You're asking about this model?" I nodded. "Yes. Someone I know might have bought it here." He studied the photo, then turned to a computer screen on the counter. "That's a Vacheron Constantin Traditionnel, reference number 4010T. We only sold one of these recently, about 8 weeks ago." He glanced back at me. "Would you happen to know the exact amount paid?" I slid the folded bank statement toward him. $30,000, I said quietly. He typed something, then nodded, confirming what I already feared. That matches perfectly. March 9th. It was purchased with an Amex ending in 41-27. That was my card. I felt the floor tilt. For a second, I couldn't hear anything but the ticking. So many clocks, all whispering the same cruel rhythm. Was it a gift? Benson asked carefully. Not the kind I meant to give, I said. My voice surprised me, steady, low, almost calm. He seemed to sense it wasn't the time for more questions. When I stepped outside, the rain had turned cold again, slicing sideways under the wind. I stood there for a long moment, watching droplets collect on the photo before I crumpled it in my fist. The truth had a strange taste, metallic, like blood or regret. I got into the truck and sat in silence. My reflection in the windshield looked foreign, a man worn down not by years, but by love misplaced. I thought of Samantha at 10, chasing seagulls on Alki Beach, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. That memory used to make me proud. Now it only hurt. I closed my eyes and whispered to the empty cab, "If I stay quiet now, what part of me dies next?" The words hung there, heavy and honest. When I finally started the engine, the radio flickered on, some old blues song humming low. I drove back through the rain, past the docks, past the places that once held joy. The coffee waiting at home would be cold by the time I got there, and so, I realized, was the man who used to forgive everything. When the truth starts to surface, it doesn't come gently. It explodes. Don't look away now, this is where everything begins to shift. The rain had stopped by the time I got home, but the air still carried that damp chill that seeps into your bones. The house felt heavier than usual. Every room too quiet, too still. I dropped my keys on the counter and stood in the kitchen for a moment, staring at the empty coffee cup from that morning. The silence pressed against my ears like water. Upstairs, the old clock had started ticking again, faint but steady, its rhythm somehow louder than my thoughts. I sat down at my desk, opened my phone, and stared at Samantha's number. I didn't want to call her. I wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding, that I was wrong about everything. But there was no peace in pretending anymore. My thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment before I pressed call. The first attempt went to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," I said quietly. "We need to talk." My voice sounded smaller than I'd expected. I ended the call, waited a few minutes, then tried again. This time she picked up. "Dad?" Her tone carried a note of surprise, and something else. Guilt, maybe. "Yeah, it's me," I said. "You busy?" A pause, then a sigh. "I'm kind of in the middle of something. Can this wait?" "It can't," I replied. "I saw the post, Sam. The watch, the one you gave Gregory Hale." Her silence was immediate and heavy, stretching like wire between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was brittle. "You're overreacting. Ethan's medical bills were real, Dad. We just..." "Use the money for a gift instead," I interrupted. "You told me he was sick, Samantha. You cried," her tone sharpened. "You wouldn't understand our life now. Gregory's been helping us, investing in Ethan's firm. He deserves something back. You make it sound like I stole from you." I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a quiet, "You did." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear faint music in the background on her end, laughter, glasses clinking. Her world was alive, full of people. Mine felt like the hollow echo of what used to be. "Dad," she said finally, her voice softer, rehearsed. "You've always made me feel guilty for trying to live differently. I'm not that little girl anymore. You can't control everything." Her words were sharp, each one cutting a little deeper than the last. "I never wanted control," I said, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure it was true. "I just wanted honesty." "Then stop making me feel like a criminal," she snapped, and the line went dead. I sat there staring at the phone, my reflection flickering on the black screen. My hands trembled. I wasn't angry anymore. I was hollow. The clock in the hall ticked louder, its second hand jerking forward as if mocking me. After a few minutes, I opened my laptop. I needed to see for myself. I logged into my online banking and scrolled through the recent transactions. At first, the usual things, utilities, groceries, but then a pattern emerged. Small amounts, scattered across boutiques and spas, restaurants I'd never heard of. Each charge linked back to the same secondary card, hers. I took screenshots, saving them to a folder I labeled Records. It wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity. For the first time, I wanted facts, not feelings. I drove to the bank before closing hours. The teller, a young man with nervous eyes, asked how he could help. "I want to revoke a secondary user from my account," I said. He hesitated. "Of course, sir. We'll just need confirmation of authorization." I handed him my ID and waited as he clicked through screens. The process felt painfully slow. Finally, he said, "Once this is signed, the access ends immediately." "She'll be notified I signed." My hand didn't shake. When I stepped outside, the evening light had turned cold and silver. I checked my phone before getting into the truck. That's when I saw it. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Mercer, I know what your daughter did. She's not just spending your money. She's using your name." I froze. The words blurred as I read them again and again. Using my name? I saved the number but didn't reply. The air suddenly felt thinner, like the world was holding its breath. Back in the truck, I stared through the windshield at the reflection of the city lights on the wet street. I'd thought the betrayal ended with the money, but something deeper was waiting beneath the surface. "This isn't about the watch anymore," I murmured. "It's about who she's become and what she's hiding." The clock in my dashboard ticked once, then twice, before settling into a steady beat that seemed to match my pulse. By the time the streetlights flickered on, I had made up my mind. The next time I saw Samantha, I wouldn't be the forgiving father she remembered. The morning came wrapped in fog, the kind that blurs the world until you can't tell where the sky ends and the ground begins. I hadn't slept. My mind kept replaying the message on my phone, those 8 words burning behind my eyes. "She's not just spending your money, she's using your name." I'd read it over and over until dawn, hoping it would somehow change its meaning. It didn't. By 7, I was already dressed, coffee untouched, heart hammering like a second clock in my chest. The house was so still that even the ticking in the hallway seemed hesitant. I pulled out my folder of bank records and the crumpled photo of the watch, slipped them into my coat pocket, and grabbed my keys. If someone had stolen my name, I needed proof, real proof. The drive downtown was silent except for the hum of tires on wet asphalt. Seattle looked gray and tired, the streets shining from the night's rain. I parked outside Leland and Shaw, the small law office that had helped Laura and me with our will years ago. James Leland was an old friend, one of the few who hadn't vanished after the funeral. He'd once told me, "A signature is more than ink. It's a man's word on paper." He looked older when he came out to meet me, gray beard, glasses slipping down his nose, but his handshake was still firm. "Daniel," he said, "you look like hell." "Been worse," I replied. "I need you to check something for me." I handed him my ID, a copy of my credit statement, and the message from my phone. His brow furrowed. "What am I looking for?" "Anything under my name that shouldn't exist." He studied the papers, then motioned for me to follow him into his office. The smell of old leather and burnt coffee filled the room. He sat behind his desk, typing into a database while I stood by the window, staring out at the drizzle. The seconds dragged like hours until he finally exhaled a low whistle. "Daniel," he said, turning the screen toward me, "you're not going to like this." There it was, my name, my address, my signature, on a loan agreement for $80,000. The cosigner, Samantha Mercer. The date, 2 weeks after she'd asked for the $30,000 medical transfer. The room went quiet except for the faint hum of the computer fan. I could barely breathe. "You're telling me my daughter forged my signature," I said slowly. "I'm afraid so," James said softly. "This was filed electronically through a broker connected to Hale Investments. Same circle as your son-in-law's company." Hale. Gregory Hale. The name landed like a stone in my gut. Samantha's father-in-law, The man with the $30,000 watch. The pieces clicked together in one merciless instant. I stood, gripping the back of the chair until my knuckles whitened. I need a copy of that file. Daniel, James said, voice careful. If what I think is happening here is true, this isn't just family trouble, it's fraud. You could press charges. I'm not pressing anything, I said through my teeth. Not yet. I walked out before he could say another word. The air outside was cold and sharp. I dialed Samantha as I got into the truck. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. Dad? I just left Leland's office, I said. He showed me a loan. My name's on it. You care to explain how that happened? Silence, then a shaky laugh. You've been digging through my life again, haven't you? God, you can't just let me live. You forged my name, Sam. My voice didn't rise, but it carried enough weight to silence her. That's not surviving. That's stealing. Her tone hardened. You always made me feel small. You think because you paid for everything, you get to own me. I did what I had to. What you had to, I snapped. You had a choice. You just didn't like the one that didn't come with a credit limit. She hung up on me. Just like that. The line went dead, and all I could hear was my own breathing. An hour later, I found myself parked in front of her house in Kirkland. The place looked like a postcard. Perfect lawn, stone walkway, the kind of place that whispered success. It was built on lies. Ethan opened the door before I could knock. His expression was smug, practiced. Daniel, he said coolly, now's not a good time. I stepped closer. You both used my name for a loan. You think I wouldn't find out? He smirked. You're overreacting. It's just business. We'll pay it back. You used me, I said quietly. Both of you. But that ends today. He shrugged. You've always been dramatic. Maybe it's time to let the next generation handle things. The anger in me snapped cleanly, like ice breaking. I turned away before I could say something I couldn't take back. As I walked toward the truck, a woman from across the street, middle-aged, holding a dog leash, called out softly. Excuse me, sir, she said. I don't mean to pry, but I saw your daughter and her husband meeting with a man from Hale Investments last week. They had papers, looked official. I heard your name. I thanked her, heart sinking. I didn't need to ask what papers, I already knew. They were selling something else with my signature, my reputation. I sat in the truck, staring at the reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked unfamiliar, colder, harder, the kind of man who had finally reached his breaking point. By the time I started the engine, I knew what had to be done. Love had its limits, and mine had just run out. The night after the confrontation stretched on forever. The rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind was worse. My house felt hollow, like a stage after the audience had gone home. I sat in my study surrounded by evidence, bank statements, the forged loan contract, screenshots of every charge Samantha had made. The photo of the $30,000 watch lay on top of the pile, the gold face catching what little light came from the lamp. Every object on that desk was proof that the person I'd loved most had traded honesty for greed. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her handwriting, my name, written in perfect imitation, on a loan I never signed. At some point, I gave up and made coffee instead. It tasted burnt, but it kept me company. The clock in the hall ticked again, its steady rhythm sounding like a countdown. I knew what it was asking. How long are you going to stay quiet? By mid-morning, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, expecting another unknown number or worse, Samantha. But the voice on the other end was calm, professional. Mr. Mercer, this is Elaine Carter. James Leland forwarded your file to me. I believe I can help. Her tone carried confidence, not pity, and for the first time in days, I felt like someone was on my side. You've read it? I asked. I have, she said, and I think your daughter's involvement might be only one piece of something much bigger. The name Gregory Hale keeps showing up in the background. My stomach tightened. The same Hale from Hale Investments? Yes, she said. There's a pattern of shell loans and falsified guarantees tied to your identity. It's likely your name was used to secure an investment deal. Hale's company has been under quiet investigation for months. If we act now, we can expose the entire operation and clear your record in the process. I stared at the papers on my desk. The idea of justice sounded clean and logical when she said it, but my mind was still tangled in something messier. Blood, love, family. If we do this, I said slowly, Samantha gets caught in the crossfire. Elaine didn't flinch. If we don't, you go down with her. Her bluntness hit hard, but I respected it. There was no easy version of the truth. I hung up, promising to meet her in an hour, then walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood shimmered under thin light. People walked their dogs, carried groceries, went on living. I wondered how many of them had ever realized that love and duty could turn into a trap. At her office downtown, Elaine's desk was buried in files and legal pads, but her mind was sharp and organized. She walked me through every step, how we'd freeze accounts, subpoena documents from Hale's company, and notify the bank of fraudulent activity. But I'll need your consent, she said, sliding a form toward me. Once you sign, we can move. I picked up the pen but hesitated. The paper in front of me might as well have been a declaration of war. If this ruins her, I said, how do I live with that? Elaine leaned forward, her eyes steady. Mr. Mercer, you're not ruining her. She did that herself. You're choosing the truth. Her words cut through me. I signed. After she left to make copies, I sat there a moment longer, staring at my signature, my real one, ink fresh on the page. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like mourning. That night, back home, I spread the files again across the table. I recorded everything, voicemails, texts, even the message from the stranger. Each click of the save button was another nail in the coffin of what I used to believe about family. When I finished, I pulled out a blank sheet of paper and began to write. Not a statement, but a letter. Samantha, you taught me that love without truth is just silence wearing a smile. I wanted to protect you from this world, but it turns out the world needed protection from you. I don't hate you, Sam, but I can't be your shield anymore. I folded the letter and left it on my desk. It wasn't for mailing. It was a farewell. As night fell, I called Elaine one last time. Do it, I said. My voice was steady now. You're sure? She asked. Once we start, there's no turning back. I'm not turning back anymore. When the call ended, I stood by the window, watching the city glow beneath the clouds. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the same man who'd once believed love could fix everything. He looked older, yes, but also certain. As the line went dead, I realized the hardest part wasn't losing my daughter. It was admitting I already had. Morning came, wrapped in fog so thick it erased the skyline. For once, I didn't rush to make coffee or check my phone. I sat at the kitchen table, listening to the stillness, feeling the weight of what I'd done settle into the walls. There was no triumph in me, only quiet finality. When my phone finally buzzed, the sound startled me. It's done, Elaine's voice said on the other end. The authorities have the documents. Hale Investments is officially under investigation. I didn't speak right away. I stared out the window at the slow-moving mist curling over the street. All right, I finally said. My voice came out low, steady. Thank you. She paused. You did the right thing, Daniel. Oh, did I? I wasn't sure anymore. Right didn't feel like the right word. By mid-morning, the story began spreading through news sites and local radio. Hale Investments, under federal investigation for fraudulent practices. I read the headline 3 times, the words blurring before my eyes. They'd named names, Gregory Hale, several senior partners, and one junior associate listed as a co-signer on multiple false contracts. Samantha Mercer. My daughter's name, right there in black and white for the world to see. The phone started ringing soon after. The first few calls I ignored. By the 7th, I shut it off completely. When I turned it back on an hour later, There were 12 missed calls and 3 new voicemails. I played the first one. "Daddy, please," Samantha's voice trembled. "They're saying terrible things. You have to tell them it was a mistake. They're coming for us. What did you do?" Her voice cracked on that last word. Us, as if we were still a family, still on the same side. I stopped the playback halfway through the next message. I couldn't listen to her cry anymore. The sound tore at something soft and old inside me, the part that still wanted to protect her, even now. Later that afternoon, I met Elaine in her office. She looked tired but focused, stacks of new files surrounding her desk. "The case is moving fast," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "We've confirmed that your daughter's signature appears on several shell contracts connected to Hale. It's enough to prove she participated knowingly, I repeated, the word heavy in my mouth. Elaine nodded. "It also shows your name was used as collateral for a larger deal. Without your cooperation, Hale's lawyers will try to claim you consented. But with your statement and records, we can shut that down." I nodded, though I barely heard her. My mind was already elsewhere, on Samantha, on the image of her at 15, sitting on the back porch with Laura, laughing about college dreams. I wondered if that version of her still existed somewhere beneath the wreckage. When I got home, the afternoon light had gone soft and gray. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee grounds, old ghosts of easier days. I walked through the living room, pausing by the mantel. A single frame stood there, Laura and Samantha at the lake, sunlight in their hair. I traced the edge of the frame with my thumb. "Forgiveness doesn't mean blindness," I whispered. Laura would have understood that. I spent the next hour cleaning, not out of necessity but instinct, sorting through piles of papers, dusting the corners I'd ignored. Each sweep of the cloth felt like erasing the remnants of a life I couldn't return to. By nightfall, I thought the day was done. I was wrong. Just after 9, a soft knock sounded at the front door. When I opened it, no one stood there. Only a single white envelope lay on the mat, my name written across it in Samantha's looping handwriting. My heart stumbled. I took it to the kitchen and opened it with shaking hands. The letter inside was messy, words slanted, ink smudged. "Dad, I don't know where to start. Hale wasn't who I thought he was. He threatened Ethan, said if I didn't sign, he'd ruin us both. I told myself I was doing it to protect my husband, but I didn't stop him when he used your name. I wanted that life, Dad. I thought I deserved it, and I was wrong." I paused, breath catching. The letter went on. "They'll come for me, and maybe that's fair. But please know, I never meant to hurt you. If you can't forgive me, at least remember I once tried to be your little girl." The words blurred as my eyes filled. I set the letter down and stared at it for a long time, the paper trembling under the faint hum of the refrigerator. I didn't cry, not because I didn't want to, but because I had no tears left. Finally, I folded the letter and placed it beside Laura's photo on the mantel. The air in the room felt lighter somehow, though I couldn't explain why. "I remember," I whispered. "But memory isn't redemption." Outside, the fog had lifted. The streetlights glowed against the wet pavement, and for the first time in days, I could see the stars above the sound. The storm outside had finally passed, but inside me, the reckoning had just begun. Morning came quietly, as if the city itself was too tired to make noise. For the first time in weeks, the sky over Seattle was clear. No fog, no rain, just a pale wash of sunlight slipping through the blinds. I stood at the kitchen counter, waiting for the coffee maker to finish its steady drip. The smell filled the house, warm and familiar, almost comforting. On the table, beside Laura's framed photo, lay Samantha's letter. I hadn't moved it. Every morning since it arrived, I found myself reading the first few lines, not out of guilt anymore, but out of a strange, calm curiosity. The words still hurt, but the pain had cooled into something quieter, almost reflective. I no longer saw my daughter as a villain, just a person who had lost her way. The phone rang mid-morning. I recognized Elaine's number and answered before the second ring. "She's agreed to cooperate," Elaine said without preamble. "Samantha has given a preliminary statement to the investigators. She's willing to testify against Hale in exchange for leniency. I closed my eyes for a moment. And what does that mean for her? It means, she replied carefully, she'll probably avoid prison if she provides enough evidence to link Hale directly to the forged loans. But the decision ultimately depends on how honest she is. I was quiet for a while, the hum of the refrigerator filling the gap. Do you want me to support her deal? I asked finally. I think it would help, Elaine said. They'll want confirmation from you that you won't press independent charges. I thought about it, about justice and mercy, about what those words meant when they collided. Then I said, if it means she tells the truth, then yes. Let her speak. Elaine exhaled softly, relief hidden behind professionalism. I'll arrange it. A few days later, I was asked to come to the federal building downtown to verify documents and confirm parts of my own statement. The corridor smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. The walls were bare, the kind of colorless beige that drains all feeling from a place. When I entered the waiting area, I froze. Samantha was already there. She sat on a plastic chair, hands folded tightly in her lap, her hair pulled back in a plain ponytail. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a simple gray shirt and jeans. Her face looked smaller somehow, the kind of face that had learned what consequences feel like. When our eyes met, she stood, hesitated, then whispered, "Hi, Dad." "Hi," I said softly. For a long moment, neither of us moved. There were so many things I could have said, accusations, memories, apologies, but none of them felt right. Instead, I just looked at her, memorizing the person she was now, stripped of everything she thought made her untouchable. "I never thought it would end like this," she murmured. "It's not the end," I said. "It's just the first time you've stopped lying." Her chin trembled. She nodded, then looked down. "I'm going to tell them everything," she said. "About Hale, about the loans. I'll take whatever comes after." "That's the first honest thing you've said in a long time," I replied quietly. She lifted her eyes again, watery but steady. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "I know," I said, "and that's not what this is about anymore." For a second, her hand twitched, as if she wanted to reach for me, but she didn't, neither did I. An agent came to call her name, and she followed without looking back. I watched her walk down the hall, her figure small and fragile against the sterile light. I realized then that punishment didn't always come from handcuffs or courts. Sometimes it came from the moment you finally saw yourself clearly. When the paperwork was done, I stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. The city hummed around me, cars, sirens, seagulls by the waterfront, but it all sounded distant, like background music to a quieter life waiting ahead. I drove to the edge of Puget Sound and parked near the pier. The tide was low, the water catching sunlight in slow silver waves. I walked along the rocks, breathing in salt and cold air. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what had been lost, only what could still be reclaimed. My peace, my integrity, maybe even my hope. I remembered something Laura used to say when life got heavy. Even broken things can let light through if you stop trying to fix them. Maybe that's what this was, not repair, but release. When I got home that evening, the house felt lighter. I went to my desk, folded Samantha's letter neatly, and slipped it into the drawer. Then I opened a fresh page in my journal and wrote, "Sometimes love is not about saving someone. It's about letting them face the truth you once protected them from." I read the line twice, then closed the journal. The house was quiet again, but for the first time in years, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. 3 months passed, like slow waves rolling against the shore. The headlines faded, reporters moved on, and the noise that had consumed my life finally quieted down. Hale Investments no longer existed. Its offices closed, its logo scraped off glass doors downtown. Gregory Hale had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for fraud and coercion. Watching the verdict on the evening news, I didn't feel triumph, just relief, the kind that settles in quietly when something poisonous has finally been drained from your system. Samantha's fate was different. The court granted her a suspended sentence, community service, and mandatory restitution payments. Elaine called it a fair outcome. I thought so too. Justice didn't need to be cruel, it just needed to be clear. I watched her hearing from a distance, my hands folded, my heart steady. When she read her statement of apology before the judge, I noticed she didn't cry this time. Her voice was small, but it didn't shake. That, in its own way, felt like growth. After the case closed, I sold the old house. Too many ghosts lived there. The sound of Laura's laughter, the echo of old arguments, the ticking clock that had once felt like a heartbeat. I moved into a modest apartment near the coast, where I could see the water from my window. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The walls smelled of new paint, the floors creaked in unfamiliar ways, and for the first time in years, I felt like my life was starting over instead of winding down. My days became simple. I fixed old watches at the local repair shop for extra income, not because I needed the money, but because I liked the work, the patience it demanded, the quiet focus it offered. Every watch had a story, a rhythm that needed restoring. I found something soothing in that. The idea that broken things could still keep time if you treated them with care. Sometimes I'd meet my neighbor Walter, a retired sailor who walked with a limp and carried stories longer than the tides. We'd sit on a bench overlooking the harbor, sipping weak coffee from paper cups. "You ever think about starting over?" he asked once. "I already did," I said, and for once it felt true. Weeks later, on a soft gray afternoon, my phone buzzed. The number was familiar but unexpected. I hesitated before answering. "Dad?" The voice was quiet, tentative. "Samantha," I said. There was a pause and then, "I wanted to tell you, I'm working again. At a small clinic. It's not much, but it's mine." Those last two words caught me, the same phrase I'd used months ago about my new apartment. I smiled faintly. "That's all I ever wanted for you," I said. "Something that's yours." Silence stretched between us, not awkward, just fragile. There were no apologies this time, no dramatic confessions, just breathing, shared across the line. It was enough. After the call ended, I sat at my workbench, turning over a brass pocket watch I'd been meaning to repair for months. Its gears were old, misaligned from years of neglect. I adjusted one tooth at a time until the mechanism clicked smoothly again. When I closed the case and wound it up, the ticking returned, steady, confident, alive. Time doesn't heal, I thought. It teaches you how to carry what it can't erase. The days slipped by quietly after that. I walked by the beach most evenings, sometimes barefoot, letting the cold water lap at my ankles. The salt air reminded me of youth, of things that had seemed permanent but never were. I didn't try to forget the past anymore. I just stopped letting it decide who I was. One evening, as the sun sank low behind the sound, I found an envelope waiting in my mailbox. My name was written in the same looping script I'd once seen on a fraudulent loan, Samantha's handwriting. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. Dad. I wanted to say thank you. Not for forgiving me, I don't deserve that, but for not giving up on me, even when I deserved it. I'm learning, slowly. I hope one day I can make you proud again. There was no return address, no signature, just that. I folded it carefully and slipped it into the same drawer where I'd kept her first letter. This one didn't ache to read. It felt lighter, like closure wrapped in ink. That night, I sat on the balcony, the sea stretched out before me, gold light pooling over the waves. The repaired pocket watch ticked steadily in my hand. The horizon glowed, endless and calm. I whispered to no one in particular. We both had to learn the hard way. As the sun disappeared, I realized I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not forgiveness, not answers. The rhythm of the tide and the ticking of the clock blended together like one continuous breath. And in that moment, I understood. Peace isn't something found, it's something chosen. The morning light spilled through the blinds in soft ribbons, catching the dust in slow motion. The sea beyond the window looked calm, stretching endlessly toward the horizon, where the sky and water met without a line between them. I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at the blank page in my journal. It had been months since I'd written anything, not because there was nothing left to say, but because, for once, I hadn't needed to make sense of my own life. Today felt different. Maybe it was time to put it all down, to give meaning to what had happened, not as a confession, but as a record of what I'd learned. The pen felt heavier than usual, but it moved easily enough. "Love is not blind," I wrote. "It only chooses to see what it hopes to save." For years, I'd mistaken silence for love. I thought enduring betrayal quietly was noble, that patience could heal what truth might destroy. But now, I knew better. Love wasn't the act of closing your eyes. It was finding the courage to keep them open and still care. I thought of Samantha, of the young woman who once bought a $30,000 watch for a man who'd manipulated her, while I unwrapped a box of socks. It used to sting, remembering that day. Now, it felt almost symbolic. Proof that love without honesty is as empty as a gift without meaning. My life had shrunk in some ways. The house was smaller, the days quieter. Yet, in that simplicity, I'd found something I'd been chasing for decades. Peace that didn't depend on anyone else's apology. I paused, looking around my apartment. The clock I'd repaired weeks ago ticked steadily beside me. It had once been frozen at 11:17, the exact time Laura died. I'd left it unwound for years, as if stopping its gears could somehow stop the ache of losing her. Now it worked perfectly again, each second falling where it belonged. I took a sip of cold coffee and continued writing. Justice is not about punishment. It's about truth being seen, even if it breaks you first. I remembered the first time Elaine told me, "You did the right thing." At the time, I didn't believe her. The right thing had felt cruel, like cutting off a limb to save the body. But now, with distance, I understood. Telling the truth hadn't destroyed my family. It had stripped away the rot that kept it from ever growing. There were moments I still missed the past. The sound of Samantha's laughter before everything went wrong. Laura's voice calling from the kitchen. The smell of Sunday breakfast. But memories, I'd learned, aren't meant to be anchors. They're reminders. They tell you who you were so you can decide who to be next. Outside, gulls circled over the water, their cries faint against the steady hush of waves. I set the pen down and leaned back, watching sunlight scatter across the surface of the sea. It looked endless, but I knew better. The tide always came back, changed but constant. Maybe that was the point of life, not to stay the same, but to return wiser. I reached for the clock and turned it in my hands, feeling its quiet rhythm against my palm. "Maybe time doesn't heal everything," I whispered, finishing the thought in my mind. "But it teaches us to live wisely with the scars it leaves." A small breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the salt of the ocean and the faint hum of the city waking up. I felt Laura there somehow, not as a ghost, but as a presence in the stillness. I imagined her smile, that patient, knowing look she used to give me whenever I got lost in my own anger. I flipped to a new page and wrote one last line. "The measure of a man isn't what he loses. It's how he stands when truth strips everything else away." For a moment, I just sat there, letting the ink dry. Then I closed the journal and set it beside the clock. Its ticking felt like company now, not a reminder of what I'd failed to keep. I stood, walked out onto the balcony, and breathed in the salt air. The morning sun warmed my face as I watched a cargo ship glide across the bay. Everything about the scene was ordinary, and that was its beauty. No drama, no noise, just life moving forward. Once I believed revenge was justice. Now I knew better. Real justice wasn't about payback. It was peace, quiet, steady, and unstealable. The tide whispered against the rocks below. The clock ticked softly behind me, and for the first time in a very long while, I felt whole. In the quiet aftermath of loss and reckoning, what remains is not the pain of betrayal, but the wisdom born from it. Life has a way of breaking us open, revealing the fragile spaces where truth, forgiveness, and strength take root. The heart learns that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to stand firm in the storm and still choose calm. Every journey through disappointment teaches the same lesson, that dignity cannot be bought, and love, when stripped of honesty, is only illusion. The things once thought essential, approval, control, material comfort, fade into insignificance when weighed against the freedom of self-respect. In time, silence becomes a sanctuary, not a punishment, and solitude a teacher, not a sentence. There comes a point when one stops asking why and begins to live with what is. The scars remain, yes, but they no longer define, they remind. They remind us that survival is not about winning or avenging, but about reclaiming the quiet rhythm of one's own heartbeat. Justice, then, is not something handed down by courts or fate, but something earned when truth and peace finally coexist within the same soul. In the end, life humbles everyone. The tides erase footprints no matter how deep they seemed at first, and time keeps its steady pace, asking only that we walk forward. Healing is not found in forgetting, but in accepting that the story has run its course. And somewhere between the ticking of a clock and the whisper of the sea, we understand. What was lost gave space for what was meant to grow. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage. It's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to? And how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.